Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to our IELTS lessons in 15 minutes. Now, did you know that in making our arguments, both in the IELTS Writing Task 2 or Speaking Part 3, we are not allowed to give generalizations unless we have facts to prove it is true. That is why in this lesson, we will be reviewing grammar, modals, and how are these useful in making our arguments. Now, in making arguments, one of the things you need to avoid is actually to make generalizations. The appropriate use of modal verbs can help in correcting this mistake. These are also important in clarifying the certainty with which you're making a point. Now, modal verbs, by definition, are auxiliary or helping verbs, so this means that they cannot be used in their own, but must be used with the main verb. So these verbs are used again with the main verb and are followed by the bare infinitive. Okay, now I want you to read these 4 sentences and decide which of these sentences are acceptable in presenting our arguments. Now you may pause this video to do this exercise. Okay, so let us check here the 2 sentences which are acceptable in making our arguments in Writing Task 2 and Speaking Part 3. So we have here sentences number 2 and number 4. Now, the sentences that are not acceptable in making our arguments in either Writing Task 2 or Speaking Part 3 are sentences number 1 and number 3. So why is that? Because again, we have to avoid generalizations. So for example here in sentence number 1 it says children with no father as a role model will become criminals. Now that is a generalization because we are not certain or sure that children with no father as a role model will become, like 100% become criminals. Instead we may say children with no father as a role model may become criminals. So there's a possibility that if these children with no father as their role model, they could become criminals. Now, to better understand this, we must study here the degree of certainty. In making arguments, again, we must avoid using generalizations unless it is known to be generally true. Okay, so what is this degree of certainty? In IELTS Writing Task 2, we have just mentioned that we should not use generalizations unless they are true. That is why we have to identify what modal here that we can use which expresses possibility. So in here, there are 3 modals which we can use to express possibility, and these are may, might, and could. Now let's study here the example sentences. Now in this table, on the left side of the table, we can see here sentences that uses overgeneralizations, and on the right side of the table we see here the sentences that uses possibility. For example, here it says extra classes will help students strengthen their academic difficulties. Now again, we are not sure, we are not 100% certain that extra classes will help students strengthen their academic difficulties. That is why we can say extra classes could help students strengthen their academic difficulties. So I want you to check the example sentences here, the 3 other example sentences here, and identify the modals that we can use to express only the possibility but not certainty. Okay, so again, we should not use overgeneralization in either speaking or writing unless these statements are proven true. Okay, so in the next area we have to move on to activate. Now I'm sure that you've understood this exercise. Now I want you to write at least one reason using the modals of possibility and explain your answer. For example, here it says what could happen if the government relies their income solely on tourism, and the example answer here is when the government relies their source of income from tourism alone, many pristine natural environment would be damaged, as many businesses would venture in developing tourist attractions. Okay, now I want you to answer exercises 2, 3, and 4, and again I want you to write here or give one reason using the models of possibility and explain a little bit your answer. All right, now you may pause this video to do this exercise. Okay, so another modal verbs we can use in making arguments is the modal verbs suggestions. The modal verbs here are must, should, ought to, have to, and could, which are often used to make suggestions for solving a problem. Now this is common in task 2 to get a question asking you to discuss a problem and suggest some solutions. For example, so we have an example here. Number 1, the strong obligation. So we can use here a must, have to, and need to. So the example sentence here, the government must take action to tackle global warming. Number 2, strong suggestion, which we can use should or ought to. The example sentence here is parents should stop their children from watching too much television. Finally, we have the possibility, which we can use could. The example sentence here is to prevent the increase of global warming, one way people could do is to recycle more. Okay, so again, these modal verbs here are used to discuss a problem and suggest some solutions. Okay, now let's activate. Now I want you to read the example essay and underline the modals. So you may pause this video to do this exercise. Now let's check our answer. The modal verbs that are used here are should, could, can, should, could, and another could. So let's read the example sentence here. The first example sentence only. So it says here, there are potential ways to solve these problems or at least reduce the effects. Firstly, governments need to reduce the people's dependence on fossil fuels and should promote alternatives. Okay, so again, we use here modals to give suggestions. Now, let's move on to our next exercise. So let's check here our next exercise. Now, from the given models here, I'd like you to give at least one reason and explain your answer. For example, it says here, what could happen when cars are banned from entering the city center? And the example sentence here is, if cars are prohibited from entering the city centers, the traffic on roads could significantly decline, but this could be inconvenient for people as it would be difficult for them to move around the city center. So I want you to, again, answer exercises 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Okay, so let's check the next one, which is hypothetical situations. So the last but not the least, in IELTS Writing Task 2 or even in Speaking Part 3, one of the things you need to do is to discuss hypothetical situations. And what are these hypothetical situations? Now, this means that you will be discussing an unreal situation in the future or imagining something. Now, what are hypothetical situations? So if you may ask, again, it is when we want to show situations or actions that are not real. And in this case, we have to use modal verbs would and could. Now let's study some example sentences here. For example, in sentence number 1, if the government spent money on hospitals, people would be healthier. Sentence number 2, there could be a cleaner environment if local residents abide the laws that keep the surroundings pristine. And sentence number 3, solutions could only be achieved if the government or when the government and the citizens collaborate. So as you notice here that we use here conjunction if, all right, and paired with would be. Also here we use is if and could be. And the third sentence here we use is could be, all right, and we use the conjunction here when. All right, so when we want to make hypothetical situations, we can combine conjunction if and when and pair it with modal verbs would be or could be. Then we can make sentences and write hypothetical situations. Okay, now let's study here the sample essay and study the highlighted modal verbs. So let's read here the example essay. Due to the growing number of cars, the amount of toxic gas emitted increases, leading to the worsening of greenhouse gas effect. If the government improves the public transportation, the commuters would not only be able to relish the services of mass transport, but they could also give up using their private cars. When this is realized, the detrimental effects of greenhouse gas caused by heavy emissions of gaseous fumes would be lessened, and road congestion would also decline. So if you notice, yes, we have to check here the explanation. So if you notice here, we use this here if and when. So the conditional or unreal situation here is if the government improves the public transportation. Again, it is conditional or it is conditional because we give a condition that the government, or if the government improves the public transportation. So what could happen here? So we use modal verbs. The commuters would not only be able to relish the services of mass transport, but they could also give up using their private cars. Similarly, we have here another conditional, which is when this is realized, because it hasn't been realized yet. We just gave here a condition. Now when this is realized, the detrimental effects would be, all right, lessened, and road congestion would also decline. All right, so again, we give condition and we pair this condition to modal verbs would be or could be. All right, so that easy. Now let's check here some exercises to check our understanding. Now what we need to do here is, on your own, I want you to finish the sentence and use the modal verbs describing hypothetical situations, would and could when necessary, and explain your answer. Now an example here is, if students take extra classes after school, they would be able to catch up with the lessons they found difficult with. This is because they can have more time and help from their private tutors to study and understand the difficult subjects better. So again, we use your hypothetical situations or condition if, and then paired it with would. Okay, so also please be careful with punctuation. So after subject, verb, and object, all right, in this clause here, yeah, we put a comma. All right, and then after that, we use the same pattern: subject, verb, and object, sentence pattern. And then we explain a little bit our answer. Okay, so I want you to do the next exercise here, exercise number 2, exercise number 3, and exercise number 4. Okay. So in this part also, I want you to I want you to master using the hypothetical situations using the following issue, and I want you to explain your answer. For example here, worsening traffic condition in major cities. Now the example sentence here is, the worsening of traffic condition in major cities could be alleviated if people decide to use public transport instead of using their private cars. This is because public transport could accommodate many passengers, which is very different from using cars. In effect, roads and highways will have more space. Now I want you to do the next exercise following the same pattern in example answer number 1. Okay, and you have to finish this until the exercise number 5. Okay, so that is the end of our lesson in the IELTS lesson in 15 minutes. If you wish to get updated of our lessons now, I want you to just click the subscribe and follow us to have more IELTS lessons. So thank you for learning, and I hope to see you again in the next lesson. Goodbye.